Welcome back to D&D Module Monday, the show in which I read a module and then talk about it for however long I see fit. Today's video is kind of an interesting one because I actually read this module back when I was still doing the more traditional reviews of them. But it really stuck with me, especially when I was sort of not completely rereading it over the couple nights ago. But it really stuck with me, and I started thinking, like, well, if I'm not going to do a traditional review, how can I really talk about this module? What is there to talk about that I find interesting? And one aspect of it became very clear, but to stop stalling, the module in question is Against the Cult of the Reptile God, it's a low-level adventure written by Douglas Niles, which I actually, hang on, because Douglas Niles, excuse me a moment, I'm just going to adjust my microphone very, very slightly. Apologies. Douglas Niles, where are they? I know I have them. Oh, is this? Hang on. Wait a minute. Yeah, he actually wrote these. The what is this? The Moonshay trilogy. Darkwalker, Black Wizards, and Darkwell. Um, these are interesting because this was basically the first trilogy of books to ever be published in the Forgotten Realms. Um, yeah, and it's kind of obvious. I once considered making a video actually about these, and I read Darkwalker and couldn't really get much further than that. I mean, they're not bad books from a technical standpoint, but they're just not outstanding. It's fairly obvious that they so it's not his fault. These books were written before TSR came into ownership of the Forgotten Realms. So he wrote these books to just be like Celtic fantasy novels, and then they were like, by the way, they're going to take place in this new world now. So a lot of things don't make sense. A lot of things aren't up to par as far as lore. Like there were things that I was reading, I was like, I don't think that's true anymore. Although to be fair, the lore of the Forgotten Realms is such spaghetti that I guess it doesn't really matter. But yeah, these books are not super phenomenal, but I also really don't think it's Douglas Niles' fault, if you get what I'm saying. But anyway, so yeah, there's that. Anyway, about Cult of the Reptile God. So, what I found, so what's, this is really, and I'll just start this off, uh, to get it out of the way. This is a really good module. It is sincerely well written. The story is fun. The story is based around the fact that it's set in Greyhawk. The village of Orlane is very slowly basically dying. People are going missing. The sort of prosperity and businesses and trade surrounding the the village have sort of dried up, and you are called there by however you get there. Basically, the DM decides to try and figure out what the hell is going on. The bulk of this module is actually made up of when you explore the village. It's split up really into three parts, but the first part is really where the majority of the module takes place, and that is where you actually explore through the village of Orlane. I could show you the picture or the map of it. You explore through the village of Orlane, and then while you're exploring, really it becomes sort of almost a mystery. It is up to the players to figure out who to best align themselves with, who they can trust, because unfortunately the village of Orlane, and this is a spoiler, has become infested by a cult of basically reptilian worshippers who are brainwashed into submitting themselves to the purposes of the evil cult. And so there are some people living in the village that are obviously like brainwashed, and you have to figure out there are entire shops that you should not go to because they are run by the cult effectively. The local temple is effectively run by the cult, And all of this plays into the mystery and intrigue, and the players have to sort of figure out again who they should align with, who they can trust, as a means to figure out how to best find where the cult is located so that they can eventually go and snuff them out. But it's a lot of fun. There are some cool characters that the DM gets to play. Obviously, it's a real sort of test for the players. This is actually considered one of the tougher modules if you do some research online, just because of how many different aspects take place. There's even things like if you take too much time, the cult will start kidnapping other members who had yet to be converted and brainwashed into the fold. They can kidnap you, your party, if you make wrong steps. So there's a lot going on. There's time limit aspects. There's, again, it's very neat in that respect. As far as the fact that it's like, hey, the player is going to have to figure out. It's almost like you have to be kind of half a detective, which is pretty cool because you didn't see that a lot, and obviously a lot of thought went into figuring out how all these systems work and what happens when. There's also some great maps in here. The maps are outstanding. Very easy to read. Very easy to sort of... This is a map of the temple, which, as you can imagine, is full of snake followers. The map of their actual dungeon. These are maps, actually, of the inns. One of the inns is basically a snake's den. The other one is very good, and you should want to go there. I believe, ironically, it's the Inn of the Slumbering Serpent that's good, if I remember correctly, and it's the Golden Grain that is full of snake people, unless I think I've got that right. Yeah. Yep. So I guess that's kind of to like confuse you, because you would think, well, if I'm dealing with snake people, I'm not going to stay at the End of the Slumbering Serpent. Well, you should. But anyway, one interesting thing of note as well. This, according to the Assam, as always, I get all my printing information from the Assam. Sometimes I put the Assam, or a lot of times I put the Assam in the description, even if I don't mention them in the video, because chances are I use them for research at one point or another during the process of making these. But there are two different types of covers that came with this module. One is lighter, one is darker. I believe this is the darker one. It looks like the darker one to me. There's no difference between them, but I just thought it would be interesting to point out. But anyway, and after you figure out what you're supposed to do in the village of Orlane, you travel through the surrounding wilderness until you eventually find the cave-like structure that's harboring the cult, and you go in and you destroy them and their leader. And like I said, it's very good. It's a little tough. I do think I remember thinking some of these combat encounters seemed a little tough for a first to third level party, in my honest opinion. But I think this is definitely a module where you should maybe run it with a higher level party, maybe a second level party, and then level them up to like 3 for completing maybe the village, and then have them be level 3 for the actual dungeon. Not easy. I thought some of these combat situations were fairly difficult. And there is sort of a reason for that, and it led to what I want to talk about. Railroading. That's probably not what you expected me to say. The reason I want to talk about railroading is because a large part of this module is based around your alignment with so you can actually see here, this is the cult activity as time passes, and it tells you who they might try to kidnap and when, what can actually go on. Just very cool stuff. The imagery, of course, is great. I'm not sure about this man's form. This guy with the dagger, that seems uncomfortable. But who knows, maybe it would work for him. So railroading, yes, so what is railroading, before I get into it? I think a lot of people, especially newer players, and I'm not trying to bag on newer players, they're newer players, they have to learn. I think a lot of people have a misconception about railroading. Railroading is not simply being told that you can't do something, which is what I think a lot of people consider it to be. I think a lot of people consider the DM saying no to be railroading, which isn't really the case. If anything, the job of the DM in a lot of situations is to tell you when you can't do something. That is kind of what separates good DMs from great DMs. Great DMs have a very, very good feel of, no, you can't do that. Whether because it's outside of the means of your character or the situation. Good DMs are more than willing to tell you no. So being told no is not necessarily railroading. I think railroading is more when your choices more often than not sort of feel like they don't matter, or there is no way possible for you to influence the situation to actually role play and make your own choices. That is more so railroading. When something is basically predetermined in a way that goes against what you're trying to do, especially if it is something that you should reasonably be able to do, that is railroading. It is the DM basically telling you what is happening instead of creating a story with you. Now, sometimes that has to happen. There are story beats, things that have to happen. That's one thing. But if it is a situation, if it's a situation in which you should have direct influence over what's going on, and the DM just decides you don't, or that what you're doing doesn't matter, that's railroading. So again, it's not just being told no. So why do I bring this all up? Because unfortunately, for as well written, especially on a technical level, as a lot of this is, and as well thought out as a lot of these systems are, Against the Cult of the Reptile God does unfortunately rely on a pretty railroaded mechanic with regard to its second half. So what you really need to do, ideally, granted you can do everything that I'm about to say on your own, it is just made much more difficult if you try to. Anyway, excuse me, I just woke up not that long ago. I haven't even had a chance to get coffee in me. Anyway, what happens is as you explore the village and the various places, you are expected to make the acquaintance and befriend a druid by the name of Rom, who has a familiar named Whiskers, who's a weasel. Rom is incredibly knowledgeable about the cult and their activities and everything they're sort of doing. Now that's great, and Rom is someone that you definitely want to figure out that you should be aligned with and get information from. That's great. The issue is that, as I said, this is a 1st to 3rd level module, and Rom is level 7. He's a 7th level magic user. He's a magic user. He's not a druid. He lives in a grove, though, so he's kind of it's weird. He's kind of supposed to be a druid, but he's a magic user. Yeah. A little odd in that respect. He lives, like I said, at the end of a trail in a hut and has a familiar, but he's a magic user. He's probably supposed to be a druid. But anyway, you're supposed to align yourself with Rom, and then Rom will actually accompany you to the dungeon and aid you in getting through the dungeon. And in the case of the final boss, which is this kind of snake lizard looking thing, pretty ugly, in the case of the final boss, we'll actually cast a number of spells, namely Globe of Invulnerability, which will just make a lot of what this Naga is, is it a Naga? I believe it's a Naga, unless I've gone insane. That looks like a Naga. It's a very ugly Naga, as I said. But he will basically cast Globe of Invulnerability, which will negate a lot of what the final boss is trying to do. It will make you immune to the fireball that the final boss casts, some of the different abilities. She tries to charm things. Rom has Dispel Magic that he can use if you get charmed by the Naga. You basically need to take Rom with you if you want any realistic chance of completing this module and defeating the boss. Now, there is good and bad to this, right? The bad part about it is that designing a combat encounter that cannot be completed by the party themselves is incredibly counterintuitive and really just not good. For as good as everything else in this module is, designing a combat encounter which you basically have to bring in an NPC if you want any chance of winning is railroading. It's railroading. Because realistically, because there are certainly ways that you can get to the temple without Rom. If you have a ranger in your party, they can kind of sit in for Rom when you're going through the wilderness to find the way there with their tracking abilities. So you can reach this point without him, although you will be very likely to die as soon as you face the final boss, because again, if you are 2nd or 3rd level and you get hit by a fireball, you're going to be in some bother, and your Cure Light Wounds is not really going to do much to protect you. So, the fact that you need to bring Rom along, who then takes part of your gold and treasure, by the way, that it's a necessity is a pretty egregious form of railroading. And as a player, it would probably be pretty frustrating. I understand that. On the other side, I don't think it's necessarily as bad as it would maybe be considered at first glance. As I said, being railroaded is not just being told no. And having NPC allies who help you is not a bad thing, it's a very good thing. I think and it's weird too, because it's kind of like Niles and TSR were kind of aware that they were railroading you a little bit, because if you read the section about Rom, if you read the section about Rom, it says, the DM must avoid making the player characters too dependent on Rom. Rom is a character and he does not know everything the DM knows. Further, Rom should only use spells when they are critically needed to save lives. The DM should allow Rom to give advice only when asked, and he may be wrong. He will refuse to lead the party. So this is them basically trying to have it both ways. They're trying to implement Rom as a failsafe, which inherently railroads the player. But they're also trying to continue to make sure that the players are able to make their own choices and stumble across the various different aspects of the module. This doesn't work. This does not work. The thing about railroading is that you can't have it, but you can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't railroad the player and say, effectively, if you want any chance of beating this module, you have to befriend this man. And by the way, you can piss him off. If you do things that he believes, like if you stay at the Golden Grain Inn, he will believe that you are aligned with the cult, and it becomes much more difficult to basically align with him. Understandably, because he's like, well, if you're hanging out with the snake people, because he knows the snake people are at that inn, he's not going to want to hang out with you. So they are trying to have their cake and eat it too. What they should have just done, rather than, if they wanted to make it so that you could bring Rom along and he could help you out, that's totally fine. There's nothing wrong with an NPC. If anything, NPC characters are good because, believe it or not, they give the DM someone to play as. I know you say, well, the DM plays as the enemy. Well, sometimes the DM wants to be the good guy. And giving them the chance, if the players make the correct moves, to give the DM someone to play as a guest star party member is good. But them trying to basically, like I said, do it both ways as far as develop a combat encounter that realistically cannot be beaten without the presence of this man, while also maintaining the exploration and narrative aspects garnered by the player, just does not work. It does not work. What they should have just done is made the combat encounter easier. Don't have the Naga start you off with a fireball on your 2nd or 3rd level party. That would probably have been a better idea. But I really, like I said, what I wanted to do was take the chance to sort of talk about railroading, and I bring this up because, again, this is an example of railroading. If you can't do something without following a specific set of parameters, as I said, I don't think you can realistically beat this module without Rom Rom not only leading you to the temple, but then helping you out with the temple's structure and obviously the final boss. This is a really horrible example of railroading. Your dungeon master telling you no is not you being railroaded. And I only bring this up because I see that a lot when people talk about railroading, and I think it's liable to give off the wrong idea. This almost undoes a lot of the intrigue and good that is written, and I mean, there is so much good stuff in here as far as what the DM gets to know, where the players can make their mark, as far as what trouble they can get themselves in, how they can go about sort of saving the village. And they do save the village if you kill the Naga. But it almost undoes it all, because it's like, well, the combat portion of doing all that, which is kind of like your reward for successfully solving the mystery of who's good and who's bad, can only be done through this non-player character. That's railroading, where it takes a lot of what you've done and either throws it out or makes it never matter in the first place. That's bad. If there's anything you should take from this video, do not do that. Do not seemingly give your players choices and then make them not matter in a snap. If you have to bring in something, whether it's for a narrative element, whether it's for ease of flow, occasionally as the DM, you have to bring in things that are just going to happen. It might be connected to the greater scope of your world. And that is interesting too, because this is actually a great module to kick off Greyhawk campaigns. So if you wanted to have something happen because you were going to use it as part of your world, that's great. But that would also normally be something that the players, if something's going to happen in the greater overarching world anyway, that's something that the players probably wouldn't have a whole lot of influence on. I'm trying to think, oh, the dogs are barking again, I apologize. Like, I'm trying to think of an example in a campaign. Oh, Critical Role's a good example in the first campaign. Like when the dragons attacked in the first campaign. That's not railroading because Matthew Mercer made a bunch of dragons attack. Because what would they have done to stop it? Certain things happen in the world. These are supposed to be living, breathing worlds. But railroading, as far as sort of undercutting and throwing your players into situations in which they cannot succeed unless they do things exactly as the DM has written them, that's not good. And that is what, if you are a DM or striving to learn how to play D&D, is what you should really, really look to avoid. Yeah, I think that's kind of the point that I wanted to get across, because it does frustrate me to some extent when people talk about railroading incorrectly. And mind you too, I should just mention as well, a poorly written campaign, or a campaign that just isn't fun, maybe your friend kind of sucks at DMing, no offense, is not railroading either. Like, I think railroading is this term, unfortunately, that just gets thrown around so frequently that at this point it's become a catch-all, where it's supposed to describe anything bad going on in tabletop gaming, when that just isn't true. It just is not true. That is not what railroading is. Railroading, again, is sort of having your choices made to not matter in situations in which they really should. That is railroading. And that is what, unfortunately, again, could you complete Cult of the Reptile God without Rom? Sure. Would you be likely to succeed? No. Are there other avenues through which you can not use Rom and succeed? Not really. That's why it's railroading. Because you have one choice you can make, and if you don't make that choice, you pretty much lose. And if you do, you win, basically. Because he does make the final fight in a lot of ways kind of easy. Like I said, he's basically a failsafe for some of the abilities that the Naga has. But very interesting in that respect for Against the Cult of the Reptile God, in that it's so good from its sort of intrigue and exploration aspects, especially in the beginning. The middle section, because the three sections are this is the middle section. The three sections are the village is the first section, then traveling to the lair of the reptile god is the second section, then the actual lair is the third. The traveling of the wilderness is just kind of weird. It's very short. It goes quickly. It takes place, you can see on this map here, sort of like it's just a little weird because it like happens in a flash. So it I wouldn't say it's like shouldn't be. Maybe it just shouldn't be there. I don't know. I don't think it's bad. And you can come across some wandering monsters, and it actually fills in because sometimes monsters from the swamp have been sort of bothering Orlane, so it does fill in some flavor parts. But it just feels a little weird because like I don't know, it's so short. It's all done on one page, effectively. You have half the page here and half the page there. Either way, unfortunately, Against the Cult of the Reptile God, a great exhibition in sort of letting your players unravel and solve things on their own, and also being really fun for the DM, because I imagine being able to play as both the cult members and people who are not evil must be really fun. But then it kind of gets undone with the fact that its second half really only has one conclusion that the player then gets forced into. And because of that, it's not a great example of railroading. But please, if you learn anything from this, it is what railroading actually is. Please, 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 the next time you are told no, don't sit and scream and go complain to Reddit that your DM is railroading you. That's not necessarily the case. Your DM is working very hard, and just because they don't let you, as a level 1 fighter, take 13 actions and do a double, triple, quadruple backflip over a roof, does not mean they're railroading you. Please. Although I think the DM should let you do that and let you die, and then you can roll a new character and realize you shouldn't do that. That's what I would do if I were the DM. But yeah, Against the Cult of the Reptile God, pretty fun. If you wanted to run this, I would maybe set it up so that they're not so reliant on Rom. Don't remove Rom. He can still be a valuable source of information, but maybe readjust the dungeon and the final boss, of course, as to make it so that it's completable without him. And then it would probably, I think this would all play a bit better, and it would remove some of those railroading aspects. But yes, unfortunately, so it's kind of a mixed bag. I really enjoyed reading it though. It's like I said earlier, it's very well written, and I would say if this would be a great sounding board because it is low level. If you wanted to play a Greyhawk campaign, again, you make some adjustments to some of the more railroady aspects and take the best of what goes on in the village as far as the events and the people themselves and the characters. And I think you'd have a great sounding board to launch a full scale, long campaign. But yeah, so that was me ranting about railroading for 30 minutes. I want to thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.